The boarding door of United Airlines Flight 2247 is still open when it happens. Gate B14 at Chicago O'Hare International Airport is buzzing with the particular exhausted energy of a Tuesday afternoon departure. Rolling carry-ons, crying toddlers, and the synthetic recycled smell of a jet bridge that has absorbed 40 years of human desperation. The Boeing 737-900ER sits on the tarmac beyond the glass, its engines not yet spinning, its cabin not yet pressurized, 178 seats waiting to carry their occupants from the gray flatlands of Illinois to the glittering sprawl of Los Angeles International Airport. Flight time, 4 hours and 11 minutes. Weather at destination, clear skies, 74 degrees. Everything on paper looks routine. And then the man in row 1A boards the plane. He shuffles through the jet bridge door with the slow, uncertain gait of someone unfamiliar with their own body. His jacket is a tan canvas barn coat, the kind you find at Goodwill in November, missing 2 buttons. His jeans are dark but frayed at the knees. His sneakers are white New Balance, the $29.99 variety, scuffed almost entirely gray. His hair is unwashed, slightly matted at the temples, and he carries no rolling bag, only a battered canvas tote that says Chicago Public Library on the side. He is unshaven. He smells, faintly, of something that might be cigarette smoke, or might simply be old clothes. His eyes, if you look closely enough, are calm and extremely alert, though almost nobody looks closely enough because the moment he steps into the cabin, a voice cuts through the recycled air like a blade through silk. "Oh, my God." The voice belongs to the woman in 2A. She is already seated. She arrived at Gate B 14:45 minutes early specifically to be first in the priority boarding line, though her ticket is not priority. She argued with the gate agent about this for 11 minutes, a confrontation witnessed by 23 passengers and 3 United Airlines employees. She is 51 years old, wearing white linen pants that will not survive this flight, a pink blazer, and reading glasses pushed up on her head that she uses primarily as a prop. Her name, according to her boarding pass, is Diane Mercer Holloway, though she introduced herself to the gate agent as a very loyal United customer with platinum status. A claim that was quietly disproven when her boarding pass returned a beep and a red light and the gate agent had to manually override it. She has complained about her seat, the temperature in the gate area, the lack of Evian at the water station, and the fact that the gate agent was clearly not listening to her. She is, in the particular taxonomy of air travel, exactly the kind of person who makes cabin crews send each other silent looks across the galley. And now she is staring at the man in 1A with unconcealed disgust. "Excuse me," she says, loud enough for the first 4 rows to hear. Are they really letting anyone on the plane now? Does United not have standards anymore?" The man in 1A does not respond. He lifts his canvas tote into the overhead bin with steady, practiced hands and settles into the window seat with an ease that seems almost deliberate. What Diane Mercer Holloway does not know, what not a single passenger in the cabin of Flight 2247 yet knows, is that the man she just publicly mocked, the man she called a violation of airline standards while 18 strangers watched, is not who he appears to be. The tattered jacket, the unwashed hair, the Goodwill sneakers, they are a costume. The man in 1A is not homeless. He is not a charity case. He is not someone who scraped together pennies for a last-minute coach ticket. His name is Marcus Dell, and he is worth $4.3 billion. And he has chosen this flight, this morning, this disguise, for a reason that is about to become devastatingly clear to everyone on board. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Because before we understand what happens at 35,000 feet over the Nevada desert, before we understand the silence that falls over 178 passengers when the truth erupts into the recycled cabin air, we need to understand who these 2 people are, and how, on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday in October, they ended up in seats 1A and 2A of United Airlines Flight 2247. Diane Mercer Holloway grew up in Naperville, Illinois, in a household that was comfortable but not wealthy, and spent 30 years converting that small discomfort into an identity built on performance. She married well twice, and divorced well twice also, which left her with a townhouse in Lincoln Park, a decent portfolio, and a bone-deep conviction that the world owed her a level of deference it consistently failed to provide. She has called United Airlines customer service 47 times in the last 3 years. This is not a number pulled from thin air. It is a number that exists in United's internal CRM system, flagged in red, attached to her Mileage Plus number, with a note that reads, "High contact customer. Handle with care." She has demanded upgrades she did not pay for. She has requested that passengers near her be moved because of their cologne, their accents, their children, and on one occasion their energy. She has filed complaints against 6 flight attendants by name. She has written letters to United's CEO that were answered by a customer service representative in Phoenix named Derek, who she then complained about. She has, in short, spent the better part of a decade treating the American commercial aviation system as a personal inconvenience staffed by people whose primary purpose is to disappoint her. Her flight today is personal travel. She is going to Los Angeles for a week to visit her sister and attend a charity gala, which she will describe to everyone she meets this week as the event of the season. She booked a standard economy plus seat in row 2A window and told herself she deserved the bulkhead view. She spent $43 more than she needed to for it. She arrived at O'Hare in a mood that could charitably be described as combustible. The check-in counter experience set the tone. She approached the United check-in kiosk, found it slow, said, "This is ridiculous," to no one in particular, and then joined the agent-assisted line and spent 9 minutes explaining to a 24-year-old named Priya that her bag should not have to be checked because it was clearly within carry-on dimensions. At which point Priya produced the metal sizing gauge. Diane's bag failed to fit, and the bag was checked for $35, which Diane paid while announcing that she would be writing a letter. Priya thanked her for her patience with a smile that required considerable professional training to maintain. At security, Diane removed her shoes, forgot her laptop, and blamed the TSA agent for not reminding her. At Starbucks, she ordered a venti oat milk latte with 3 modifications and then sent it back because it tasted like burnt water. By the time she reached gate B14, Diane Mercer Holloway was a pressurized vessel, and the boarding of Flight 2247 was about to become the release valve. Now let us talk about the man she laughed at. Marcus Dell was born in 1971 in Gary, Indiana, to a schoolteacher mother and an auto mechanic father who worked 60 hours a week and died at 62. He attended Indiana University on a partial scholarship, graduated with a degree in computer science that he financed partly through Pell Grants and partly through a weekend job driving a delivery van, and spent his 20s building software nobody wanted to buy. His first 2 companies failed. His third company, a logistics software firm he started in a Chicago apartment in 2001 with $12,000 on a credit card, was acquired in 2009 for $340 million. He has since built 3 more companies, invested in 47 others, and is currently the majority shareholder and executive chairman of Skypath Holdings, LLC, which is, among other things, the parent company of a regional airline operating service across 11 western states. He does not travel with an entourage. He does not, in general, make a spectacle of himself. He gives significant money to causes he does not publicize, mentors founders he does not take credit for, and has spent the last 2 years quietly doing something that sounds like a gimmick but is in fact deadly serious. Testing the culture of service organizations by experiencing them as an ordinary person would. He has checked into 3-star hotels. He has eaten at diners. He has stood in unemployment lines. And twice before this morning, he has boarded commercial flights in thrift store clothes to see what happens. What happens, he has found, is revealing. Today's flight is not random. Marcus has been in conversations with United Airlines for the past 4 months about a potential partnership, a technology integration deal worth approximately $200 million over 5 years. He has met with United's executive team 3 times. He is, in the polite language of deal-making, a very important relationship for United Airlines right now. But today he is not traveling as Marcus Dell, executive chairman, technology investor, billionaire. Today he has boarded Flight 2247 as Marcus, a quiet man in a worn jacket with a library tote bag, and he has done so because he wants to understand what it feels like to be treated as invisible by the systems that move people through the world. He has found, in his experience, that organizations reveal their true character not in how they treat the powerful, but in how they treat the people they believe cannot push back. He is seated in 1A, first class, because his assistant booked it. The jacket and the tote bag are his, borrowed from a conscious wardrobe he has assembled for exactly these occasions. His actual phone, a device that contains Among other things, a direct line to United's president of operations is in his canvas tote bag. Silenced. He did not expect the woman in 2A, though perhaps, on reflection, he should have. The jet bridge sealed. The cabin door closed. Senior flight attendant Rosa Evangelista, 18 years with United, based in Chicago, known among her crew colleagues for an unflappable composure that has survived medical emergencies, air rage incidents, and one memorable unscheduled landing in Denver, conducted her final safety walk with the neat efficiency of someone who has done this approximately 4,200 times. The 737-900ER pushed back from Gate B14 at 2:47 p.m., 14 minutes behind schedule, which in October at O'Hare is practically on time. Diane had watched Marcus settle into 1A from her seat in 2A, separated from him only by the bulkhead and a thin curtain that, on this particular aircraft configuration, was partially open during boarding, and had not stopped talking about it. Not to anyone in particular, just into the middle distance of the cabin, loudly enough for several rows to hear, a running commentary that included the phrases, "I don't understand what United is doing. These tickets are not cheap. And there should be some kind of standard." The passenger in 2C, a pediatric nurse named Gail Tran who was traveling to visit her newborn nephew, had said nothing, but had gripped her armrest slightly tighter. The passenger in 3A, a retired firefighter named Bernard Washington who had been trying to sleep since the gate, had opened one eye and closed it again with the world-weary patience of a man who has seen worse. Flight attendant Rosa had noticed Diane during boarding. Of course she had. Rosa noticed everything. She had offered Diane a pre-departure beverage with professional warmth and received a request for still water, not sparkling, not the cheap kind, in return. She had noticed the man in 1A with the canvas tote and had offered him a beverage also, and he had said thank you, just water was fine, and smiled at her in a way that was somehow both ordinary and unusually kind. The aircraft reached cruising altitude, 35,000 feet. At approximately 3:22 p.m., the seatbelt sign extinguished. The cabin settled into the low-frequency hum of the CFM56 engines, the peculiar white noise of altitude that is one of the most recognizable sounds in modern human experience. Flight attendants began beverage service, and Diane Mercer Holloway, who had spent the first 35 minutes of the flight in a low-grade simmer, found her moment. What actually matters right now is what you are about to hear, because this is the moment that 178 people on Flight 2247 will remember for the rest of their lives. Diane leaned around the bulkhead. She was not subtle about it. She was, in fact, entirely deliberate about it. She craned her neck, looked at Marcus in 1A, looked at his canvas tote in the overhead bin, looked at his worn jacket, and then, in a voice calibrated to be heard, said, "I'm sorry, but are you actually in first class? Like, do you actually have a ticket for first class?" Marcus turned from the window. He looked at her with the calm, slightly tired expression of someone who has heard a question they expected. "Yes," he said. She said it with the particular inflection that turns a single syllable into an entire editorial. "Because I have to tell you, I have platinum status, and I could not get a first-class upgrade, but apparently United is just handing them out to—" She paused, deploying her glance at his clothes like a weapon. "Anyone." The pediatric nurse in 2C had gone very still. Bernard Washington, the retired firefighter in 3A, had opened both eyes now. 3 passengers across the aisle had looked up from their phones. Rosa Evangelista, for Roseback, had tilted her head at exactly the angle that means a flight attendant is paying close attention while appearing not to. "I didn't receive an upgrade," Marcus said mildly. "I purchased the seat." Diane blinked. Something shifted in her expression. Not retreat, but recalibration. She had not expected a calm response. She had expected, perhaps, embarrassment, deflection, an apology, the quiet collapse that she had, over the years, learned to expect from people she placed below her. Instead, she received the answer of a man who had purchased the seat, which was, of course, exactly what had happened because Marcus Dell had purchased a first-class ticket on Flight 2247 without a second thought about the cost, and then dressed himself in a barn coat and New Balance sneakers to see what the world would do with it. What the world, in the form of Diane Mercer Holloway, was doing with it was becoming rapidly, unmistakably clear. "You purchased it," she repeated. "Yes." She made the sound again, that single editorial syllable, and then, inexplicably, laughed. It was not a warm laugh. It was the laugh of someone performing certainty for an audience. And the audience was the 4 rows of passengers currently watching this exchange over their seatback screens. I just think it's funny, she said, that United lets people on planes looking like they just wandered in from a shelter and then seats them in first class. No offense. No offense is the linguistic equivalent of swinging a bat and saying, duck. Rosa Evangelista was already moving. She reached the bulkhead with the smooth, unhurried stride of a professional who has learned that rushing toward conflict only escalates it. She addressed both passengers. She kept her voice low, warm, and absolutely firm. Can I help either of you with anything? It was the flight attendant equivalent of a police officer asking if everything is okay here, the question that is also a warning. Diane pivoted toward Rosa with the ease of someone who considers service workers an available audience. Yes, actually, I'd like to know your policy on the presentation of first-class passengers. Because I travel United regularly, and this is not the standard I'm used to. Rosa held the pause for exactly 1 beat. Our first-class cabin is open to all customers who have purchased first-class tickets. Ma'am, is there something else I can help you with? So there's no dress code? No standard. There is no dress code on United Airlines flights. Diane made a small sound of disbelief. Well, there should be. She turned back toward Marcus, lowering her voice to the register that is somehow louder than shouting. No offense to you personally. Some of us pay a lot of money for these seats. Marcus looked at her with the steady eyes of a man who is, in this moment, filing information. You mentioned you have platinum status, he said, and you couldn't get an upgrade. What row are you in? The question was so quiet, so precise, that it took Diane a second to realize what had happened. I'm in 2A, she said, which is economy plus, but... So you're in economy plus, Marcus said, not unkindly, and you're concerned about who's in first class. Something flickered across Diane's face. Not shame, not quite. More like the earliest stirring of a suspicion that she might have made a miscalculation somewhere, though she couldn't yet identify where. She opened her mouth. She closed it. She turned forward. Rosa Evangelista returned to the galley, exchanged one micro-expression with her colleague, junior flight attendant Kevin Park, and began preparing the first-class meal service with the focused energy of someone who knows that this flight is not over yet. She was, of course, absolutely right. At 4:14 p.m., at approximately 35,000 feet over the Iowa border, Diane Mercer Holloway ordered her 3rd glass of white wine and began a new phase of the conflict. Started, absurdly, with the window shade. Marcus had lowered his window shade to reduce the afternoon glare while he reviewed documents on a device he'd retrieved from his canvas tote. Not a battered old phone, as Diane had perhaps assumed, but a device in a plain black case that displayed, for anyone close enough to see, what appeared to be an extremely complex financial document. Diane wanted the window shade up. She was not in the window seat, Marcus was. She was in 2A behind the bulkhead with her own window. But the light from Marcus's window, she explained to Rosa, was affecting the ambience of her section of the cabin, and she felt that a reasonable person would understand why this was a problem. Rosa explained, with the patience of a saint and the firmness of a federal regulation, that the window shade was in the control of the passenger seated at the window, and that passenger had chosen to lower it. Diane asked Rosa to ask him to raise it. Rosa explained that this was not something she could require another passenger to do. Diane said, Fine. I'll ask him myself. She stood up, stepped into the aisle, which is on a Boeing 737-900ER, approximately 20 inches wide in Economy Plus, and leaned around the bulkhead partition. Excuse me, would you mind raising your shade? The light was really nice before. Marcus looked up from his document. He looked at her with the expression of a man who is, in some deep and fundamental way, not surprised. I'd rather keep it down, he said. I'm working. On what? She said. Because Diane Mercer Holloway, when backed into a social corner, deployed offense as defense, and her offense was always the same. You do not belong here, therefore your preferences do not count. Documents, Marcus said. You're reading documents. Yes. She stared at him for a moment with the measuring look of someone trying to find the angle of attack. The cabin was very quiet now. Not the quiet of people minding their own business. The quiet of people pretending to mind their own business while watching every single thing that was happening. Bernard Washington in 3A was reading the same sentence of his novel for the 6th time. The pediatric nurse Gail Tran had put in one earbud and left the other out, which is the universal signal for listening. The couple in 4B and 4C had put their shared iPad down. Kevin Park, in the forward galley, was angled very slightly in the direction of the bulkhead. "You know what?" Diane said. "I'm going to say something that I think needs to be said. I don't know why you're on this flight. I don't know how you paid for that seat. But you're making everyone uncomfortable. And I think the polite thing to do is raise the shade." The cabin held its breath. "Making everyone uncomfortable," Marcus repeated slowly. "Yes. By sitting in my seat and reading documents. By—" she gestured at him, a vague, sweeping motion that encompassed everything from his jacket to his tote bag to his existence. All of this, it was the sentence. The one that, looking back later, everyone who was on Flight 2247 would identify as the precise moment the ground shifted. Not the comment at boarding. Not the whine. Not the shade. It was all of this, the contempt compressed into 2 syllables, that changed the temperature of the cabin in a way that had nothing to do with the environmental control systems. Marcus put his document down. He looked at Diane with calm, dark eyes. And then he said, quietly and without any theatricality whatsoever, "I think you should sit down." It was not a threat. It was not rude. It was simply the sentence of a man who had decided, after 45 minutes of steady provocation, to draw a line, not with anger, but with the kind of absolute stillness that is sometimes more unnerving than anger. Diane did not sit down. Instead, she turned to Rosa, who had materialized at the galley entrance with the speed of long practice, and said, "I want to speak to the pilot. This is the request that flight attendants everywhere recognize as the escalation threshold. Not because it changes anything, pilots are busy flying the aircraft, but because it signals that the passenger making the request has passed beyond the reach of normal de-escalation." Rosa said, calmly, that she would relay the passenger's concerns. Diane said she didn't want her concerns relayed. She wanted to speak to the pilot directly. Rosa said that was not possible while the aircraft was in flight. Diane said that was absolutely unacceptable, and that she had rights as a passenger. She then said something that crossed the line from unpleasant to actionable. She told Rosa that she was going to have her fired when they landed by name, and that she knew people at United. She said it loudly enough for 8 rows to hear. A man in 5C audibly exhaled. A woman in 6A looked up from her book with an expression of disbelief. Bernard Washington, in 3A, set his novel down completely and looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man doing slow arithmetic. Rosa Evangelista, 18 years flying, looked at Diane with a face that showed nothing. Nothing except the steady, professional certainty of someone who has faced worse and come out the other side. "Ma'am," she said, "I need you to please return to your seat now. If you continue to disrupt the flight, I will be required to notify the captain." "Notify him," Diane said. "I want you to." She sat down, but she did not stop. She spent the next 20 minutes in a state of active grievance, loud enough to be heard, directed at no one and everyone, muttering about standards, about United, about certain passengers who didn't belong. The pediatric nurse Gail Tran pressed the call button and, when Rosa came, whispered something that made Rosa nod once, firmly, and return to the galley. What happened next came from the cockpit. The cabin intercom clicked on. Captain James Hartley, 22 years with United, former naval aviator, a man whose voice contained, somehow, the entire authority of the American airspace system, addressed the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. It has come to my attention that there is a disruption in the forward cabin. I want to remind all passengers that federal law prohibits interference with the duties of any flight crew member, and that disruptive behavior may result in diversion of the aircraft and legal consequences upon landing. We have 2 air marshals aboard today who are available to address any safety concerns. We ask all passengers to remain seated and respectful of your fellow travelers. Thank you. The cabin went absolutely, immediately, completely silent. And then something extraordinary happened. The passenger in 1A, the man in the barn coat, the man with the library tote bag, the man that Diane Mercer Holloway had laughed at in the jet bridge and mocked for 45 minutes at altitude, reached into his canvas tote bag and removed his phone. He made one phone call. It lasted 43 seconds. He spoke quietly, concisely, and returned his phone to his bag. 14 minutes later, while Diane was nursing her fourth glass of wine and composing what she would later describe to her sister as a scathing email to United's corporate office, something happened that none of the 178 passengers on Flight 2247 had anticipated. Rosa Evangelista appeared at the bulkhead. Behind her, with the unhurried purposefulness of people who are exactly where they are supposed to be, came two men in plain clothes whose body language told the entire cabin, without a single word, that they were law enforcement. They stopped at row 2. They did not stop at row 1. And then Rosa leaned across to Marcus in 1A and said, in a voice that was professional and warm and carried just a hint of something else. Recognition, perhaps, or the particular respect that falls when a curtain drops. Mr. Dell, the captain would like to speak with you at your convenience. And I've been asked to inform you that United's president of operations has been in contact with our crew. The cabin did not know that name, Marcus Dell. It meant nothing to the 178 passengers of Flight 2247, to the pediatric nurse and the retired firefighter and the couple sharing an iPad and the man in 5C who had exhaled. It meant nothing to Diane Mercer Holloway, who was frowning slightly, processing the phrase president of operations, with the particular confusion of someone who has deployed the word standards 40 times in the last hour and is only now beginning to understand that the word has been detonated back at her. Then Kevin Park, who had stepped into the forward galley with his phone, said something quietly to Rosa. Rosa listened. Her expression did not change. 18 years of training held, but something in her eyes sharpened. She turned to Marcus and said, very quietly, "Sir, I've just been informed that Skypath Holdings is... Are you?" Marcus said, with the ease of a man removing a costume. "Yes." And that was when the curtain fell entirely. Skypath Holdings, LLC, the parent company of a regional carrier. The entity currently in a $200 million partnership negotiation with United Airlines. Majority owned and controlled by Marcus Dell, who was currently seated in 1A in a barn coat and library tote bag, having spent the last hour being publicly mocked and humiliated by the passenger in 2A, while 18-year flight attendant Rosa Evangelista had treated him with consistent, professional dignity, and while Diane Mercer Holloway had threatened Rosa by name and announced her intention to have her fired. The two air marshals had stationed themselves quietly in the aisle adjacent to row 2. They were not dramatic. They were not loud. They were simply, inexorably, present in the way that authority becomes present when the people exercising it have run out of patience. One of them said, "Ma'am, we need to ask you some questions." Diane looked at the two marshals. She looked at Rosa. She looked, finally, at the man in 1A, the man she had laughed at, gestured at, dismissed, and publicly humiliated across 4 states at 35,000 feet. And she saw something in his eyes that she had not expected to see. Not anger, not triumph, something quieter and more serious than either. She said, "Who are you?" Marcus said, "Marcus Dell." And the name landed in the cabin like a stone dropped into still water, because Kevin Park, in the galley, had looked it up, and had quietly shown his phone to the passenger in 3B, who was a financial journalist from Chicago, and whose expression had undergone a rapid and total transformation, and who had leaned across to the woman in 3A and said something in a low voice, and the information was already spreading through the cabin in the way that information spreads in enclosed spaces with no way out. Fast, unstoppable, and total. $4.3 billion. Skypath Holdings. Partner negotiations with United. The man she had called a shelter resident. The man she had laughed at on the jet bridge. The man she had told was making everyone uncomfortable by existing in his seat. Diane Mercer Holloway's face did something complicated. The two air marshals were already speaking to her in the firm, quiet, irreversible tones of people who have crossed from observation to action. They had listened to Rosa's account of the threats made against her employment. They had heard Captain Hartley's recorded intercom announcement. They had reviewed the incident log that Rosa had been quietly maintaining on her tablet throughout the flight, with the particular thoroughness of a professional who knows that documentation is the difference between a story and a case. They had the testimony of Gail Tran, the pediatric nurse, who had described the boarding comments, the window shade confrontation, and the threat to have Rosa fired. They had, in the seat in 1A, a witness of unusual standing. United Airlines President of Operations had been on the phone with the crew for the last 12 minutes. The captain's voice came on the intercom again, and this time it was different. Not the formal announcement of before, but the words of a man who has received information and is choosing to share it precisely. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be landing at LAX as scheduled. We do need to make clear to all passengers that FAA Regulations 14 CFR Part 91.11 prohibit assaulting, threatening, intimidating, or interfering with a crew member in the performance of their duties. Any such behavior is a federal criminal offense. We appreciate your continued patience. The cabin absorbed this in complete silence. Diane was escorted to a rear jump seat area for the remainder of the flight. Not because this is standard procedure, but because the air marshals had determined that her proximity to the forward cabin had produced enough incident for one afternoon, and that the remaining 90 minutes would go more smoothly with physical separation. She went without the scene she might have made an hour ago, because somewhere between the air marshals and the name Marcus Dell and the president of operations, the steam pressure had gone out of her. She was very pale. She was very quiet. She was, for the first time in this flight, thinking about consequences rather than grievances. In first class, something shifted. It was quiet at first, the kind of quiet that fills a space when drama has passed its peak and human beings return to being human beings rather than an audience. And then, one by one, it changed. The financial journalist in 3B leaned into the aisle and caught Marcus's eye and gave him a small, genuine nod. The pediatric nurse Gail Tran, who was close enough to have watched all of it, said, simply, "I'm sorry that happened to you." Bernard Washington, the retired firefighter in 3A, who had been watching since the very beginning, said, "You handled that with a lot of class, sir." And Rosa Evangelista, who had already filed 2 incident reports and was preparing a third, came to 1A with a glass of water and said, "On behalf of the crew, Mr. Dell, I apologize for your experience today." Marcus said, "Rosa, you were professional from the moment I boarded. Every member of your crew was. I have nothing but respect for how you handled this." Rosa said, "Thank you." And then, because she had been a flight attendant for 18 years and had earned the right to say exactly what she thought on certain occasions, she said, "She was wrong. From the jetway to the last row." Marcus said, "I know." The aircraft began its descent into Los Angeles at 6:43 p.m. Pacific Time, the San Gabriel Mountains catching the last October light in the distance, the basin of the city spreading out below in its vast, improbable grid of light. The fasten seatbelt sign came on. Flight attendants took their jump seats. 178 passengers minus 1 settled into the particular piece of arrival, the compression and equalization of cabin pressure, the visual confirmation that the ground was returning, that the flight would end, that whatever had happened at altitude was about to become a story rather than a situation. At LAX, Gate 42B, for United supervisors, 2 airport police officers, and a representative from the FAA Regional Compliance Office were already waiting at the jet bridge when Flight 2247 touched down. They were not there for Marcus Dell. Diane Mercer Holloway was the last passenger off the aircraft. She was escorted by the 2 air marshals, who handed her over to the airport police with the neat efficiency of a professional baton pass. She was informed of the complaint filed by Rosa Evangelista under FAA regulations prohibiting threats against crew members. She was informed of the written statements provided by 7 passengers, including Gail Tran, Bernard Washington, and a software consultant from Seattle named Patricia Hall who had been in 4A and had, unbeknownst to anyone, been recording audio on her phone since the window shade incident, having recognized early in the flight that she was watching something that was going to require documentation. She was informed that the incident had been reported to United Airlines Office of Corporate Security. She was informed that her Mileage Plus account had been temporarily suspended pending review. She was not arrested. The threshold for criminal charges under 49 U.S.C. Section 46504 requires physical interference with crew performance, and Diane had stopped just short of that, ironically, because of the two air marshals' presence. But she was cited, documented, and officially on record. The machinery of consequence, once started, does not need a criminal charge to move. The United Airlines representative at the gate, a senior manager named Christine, who had flown in from the United Operations Center with the kind of speed that happens when a president of operations makes a personal call, spoke to Marcus in the gate area for 20 minutes. She expressed the airline's sincere apologies. She discussed, in general terms, the review process that had already been initiated regarding the incident. She did not mention the $200 million partnership negotiation directly, because she was professional and this was not the moment, but the awareness of it was in the room the way gravity is in the room, invisible, total, shaping everything. Marcus thanked her. He was, she said afterward, entirely composed. He said he understood that these incidents were difficult to prevent and that he was more interested in what happened next than in assigning blame to United as an institution. He said the crew had been exemplary. He asked that the commendation for Rosa Evangelista be formal and on record. It was. Rosa received a formal written commendation, a promotion to senior first-class cabin lead, a designation that comes with a pay increase and scheduling priority, and a personal phone call from United's VP of In-Flight Services, who had been briefed on the incident. Kevin Park received a letter of commendation. Captain Hartley received a note of recognition from operations. The entire crew of Flight 2247 became, within United's internal communications, a case study in exactly how to manage a high-conflict passenger incident with professionalism. Diane Mercer Holloway's Mileage Plus account was not reinstated. A review of her 47 complaint calls, cross-referenced with the incident reports filed by crew members she had threatened by name on previous flights, produced a pattern that United's compliance team had not previously assembled in one document. That document became the basis for a formal decision. She was placed on United's internal watch list, a status short of the federal no-fly list, which requires a specific security threat determination, but which flags her account for enhanced review on any future booking. She was, additionally, banned from United flights for a period of 2 years, a decision delivered by letter to her Lincoln Park townhouse with the kind of bland, professional finality that is somehow more devastating than anger. She has not been charged, but she has been documented, restricted, and permanently on record. The story of Flight 2247 is in the FAA database. It is in United's incident archives. It is in the written statements of 7 passengers. It is in the commendation folder of Rosa Evangelista, who wore her new designation on her uniform the following Tuesday and carried it with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had, against considerable resistance, done exactly what they were trained to do. Marcus Dell did not publish anything about the flight. He did not speak to the financial press. He did not post on social media. He returned to Chicago 2 days later, reviewed the experience in a document he keeps as part of his ongoing assessment project, and wrote one sentence that he shared with his assistant. United's crew passed. Completely. The partnership negotiations continue. The terms have not changed. The deal, by all accounts, is proceeding. What has changed is this: United Airlines, in the aftermath of the Flight 2247 incident, initiated an internal review of its complaint handling protocol for repeat offender passengers. Specifically, the process by which 47 complaints from a single customer can accumulate over 3 years without triggering a conduct review. That review produced a new cross-departmental flagging system that connects in-flight incident reports to customer complaint histories in real time. It is a small change in the grand structure of a global airline, but it is a real one, built from a real flight, between a man in a barn coat and a woman in white linen pants who could not imagine that the world contained justice she hadn't accounted for. Here is what Flight 2247 teaches in the end. The airplane is one of the last true equalizers. Not because everyone is treated equally, we know that is not true, but because at 35,000 feet, there is nowhere to go. The exit is not available. The story cannot be left in the middle. Whatever has been set in motion will reach its conclusion in the same pressurized, humming cabin where it started. This is the unique arithmetic of flight. The confined space is also the arena, and the arena has no emergency exit for the person who has forgotten that dignity is not a function of appearance. Diane Mercer Holloway laughed at a man in a barn coat on a jet bridge. She was certain, in that moment, that she could see exactly who he was. She was wrong, not only about his net worth, not only about his industry standing, not only about his relationship to the airline he was boarding, but about the more fundamental thing. She was wrong to believe that his worth depended on any of those things. A man in a barn coat deserves a window seat and professional courtesy for the same reason Marcus Dell does. Not because of what he owns. Because he is a passenger who purchased a ticket and boarded a plane. The lesson of Flight 2247 is not that you should be polite because the shabby stranger might be a billionaire. The lesson is that you should be polite because the shabby stranger is a person, and that is enough. The billionaire detail is just the part that makes the story land at 35,000 feet with the particular force of aviation karma. Swift, enclosed, unavoidable, and witnessed by an entire cabin of people who will carry it with them every time they board a plane. If this story stayed with you, if something in the hum of those engines and the silence of that cabin before the curtain fell made you feel the specific satisfaction of witnessed justice, share it. Someone you know has sat next to a Diane on a flight. Someone you know has been the person in the barn coat. This story belongs to all of them, and to everyone who has ever boarded a plane and simply wanted to get where they were going with their dignity intact. We will be back next week with another story from the cabin. Another altitude, another injustice, another moment when the truth comes out at 35,000 feet with nowhere to run. Until then, stow your carry-on, take your seat, and remember that the person sitting next to you has a story you don't know yet. Flight attendants,